I love World War I games. Okay, look, you might be a little bit confused, but I do. The problem is, nobody else does. Let me explain. I have a long-running theory that no one in the gaming world actually enjoys any of the World War I titles that we've been given. On the surface, it really seems like people are up for the idea. Pretty much every game that's been set in the Great War, Isonzo, Verdun, Beyond the Wire, even Battlefield 1 to some extent, has had a fantastic build-up, and the initial reception has been great. But why then? Why have none of them actually been able to stand up to the test of time? Okay, look, before I get really into this, let me get the initial comments out of the way that I know you're about to shoot off after hearing this hypothesis. There is an elephant in the room. A Battlefield 1-sized elephant. You see that? Does that look like a World War I game to you? No. Don't try and trick yourself, kids. It wasn't really a World War I game at all. It was a World War II game that we were gaslit into being a World War I title. Don't get me wrong, I loved it as well, and it's still popular to this day, but only because it isn't, and it never was, a World War I game. So let's get that out of the way. Battlefield 1 to this day is still very popular in almost every aspect, from the massive multiplayer to the single-player stories being told through their own nature, and I adore it. But if Battlefield 1 is a true World War I game, then I'm a socially confident Chad who has a lot of friends. But back on topic, I truly believe there has never been a successful World War I FPS. In games in general, I mean, the setting itself gives itself to some fantastic stories, a truly horrifying part of humanity. We see this in a title like Valiant Hearts, a fantastic single-player experience, a satisfying storyteller set in the First World War. So with single-player, it has seemed to be somewhat effective. But how many other World War I games have we had? And this is mostly because of the world we're in. It's a very multiplayer-driven gaming industry, and genuine multiplayer first-person games set within this time period don't really exist. Most people love modern-day shooters. They love World War II. Hey, even Vietnam has had its fair shake of FPS titles. So why has the Great War never thrived in the same way? To find out, let's have a look at some of the biggest champions within this genre. Verdun, Tannenberg, Isonzo. These guys have been the biggest tries, all part of the same World War I series, and I really enjoy this series. I always make a video when they come out, and the developers seem like they know what they're doing. They seem really passionate about the history, and they seem to want to champion this time era that has been so neglected, trying to fill that niche because no one else is doing it. The titles themselves were pretty good, and they were pretty successful, but if you go back to them now, even Isonzo, that didn't even come out 1 year ago, has 167 players playing it an hour ago. The other games are pretty much completely dead, and Isonzo, I would say in terms of multiplayer shooters, is going down that route. How can a title that released in September of 2022 not have any players? And it's nothing to do with being a small studio. Games like Hell Let Loose were made by Black Matter at the time, who weren't big, but they've become a massive studio off the back of their game. And it's a game that is fantastically well done, a perfect balance between realism and casual gameplay, but it seems to be because it fits perfectly with this time period. The Second World War has proven to be a hit. Call of Duty, Battlefield back in the day, now being surpassed by Hell Let Loose, still going strong. Even the guys that publish Squad and Postscriptum, they champion realistic FPS games. A modern day with Squad, very popular. Postscriptum with World War II was very popular. These guys even tried to do World War I, and it failed. It had a lot of similarities to your Postscriptums or Squads, published by the same studio, yet it completely dropped off within the first couple months. So what is it? What is it about this devil's time period? And I think it just comes down to the mechanics. World War I is slower, way more static. If we want to look at what makes a successful FPS these days, all we need to do is look at what's done well. The Call of Duties, the Battlefields, boy, even Hell Let Loose, which goes towards more simulator, but it's still fast enough paced and slick enough in its action that keeps people around. Squad goes even further into the hardcore audience, but because of its modern day setting, it has things like vehicles or armored cars, tanks and choppers, covering the distance of the map with long-ranged rifles as standard, keeping things interesting. But because of the historical centerpiece, the First World War doesn't have any of these luxuries. Slow, bolt-action guns for the most part. People standing around in trenches whilst enemies blend in with the horrible mud and dark terrain of the Western Front. Snipers being incredibly overpowered due to the technology at the time, resulting in headshots from seemingly nowhere. This static nature and slow-paced gameplay sounds amazing on the surface, but it doesn't actually make for fun gameplay. Verdun went hard on recreating World War I combat, with game modes of sitting in trenches to defend, then after a timer went down, a whistle would blow, attackers would have to fall back and it was your time to charge at their trenches. It was fun, to be fair, but this was all in 2014 when there was nothing like it, so it was all a little bit new. And out of all of the World War I games, I would say Verdun lasted the longest. But people soon realized that this gameplay style was very limited. The game developers ditched the forced sitting in trenches mechanic. They let players play as you wish, but given the choice, the average FPS player is just going to charge around, try and get as many kills as possible. Play Tannenberg, play Beyond the Wire like it's a Battlefield game. However, it uses bolt-action rifles, bolt-action weapons that were terrible for this fast-paced gameplay style they were trying to force in the title, and it would lead to a lot of frustration and a lot of players quitting the game. And this is why Battlefield 1 is the only game that did well. Not just because it's a Battlefield game, but because of the implementation of automatic weapons made it pretty much a World War II game. These automatic weapons means that you could run and gun, spray and pray, charge your enemies down and clear buildings fast like a modern day shooter just with a World War I skin on it. Yet if you have a more realistic World War I title, well, you're sitting in trenches getting shot at by snipers. And if you do anything different, the bolt-action rifles don't necessarily lend themselves towards the more fast-paced run-and-gun gameplay. It's a little bit like if someone tried to make an FPS game in the Napoleonic Wars era. It would just be a disaster. Mainstream players would try and charge around, firing at everything, and then realizing that muskets can't be used that way. You have to spend about 30 hours reloading after one shot, and people would leave. The ones that did want to play like a history buff would be annoyed that no one's fighting in lines, no one's role-playing. And I think that's what we've seen in the World War I titles. The history buffs don't get that authentic trench warfare that they want, and the modern day players, well, it's too slow for them. And I feel like it's just a pattern that we keep see repeating itself. So this, in my opinion, is why there has never really been a successful World War I FPS.